I was thinking about the culture of the West. The East has opera and all of the fancy stuff there. The height of culture in the West is cowboy poetry. That's sad to say, isn't it? But the honest reality is I'd rather have cowboy poetry than an opera. And so anyway, I spent 13 years, a bunch of cowboys in Elko, Nevada, put together the Cowboy Folk Life Center. And it was to preserve just the history of the Old West. And the way they decided to do that was once a year they would bring in all these cowboys from the ranches in the last week of January and let them sing songs and recite poetry, the things that wanted to preserve the culture of the West. And so that's how I kind of got exposed to it. But there were some who wrote things that kind of gelled with what I was doing. And Waddy Mitchell, an Elko cowboy, wrote a poem titled "The Whole Load," and it just fits with what church planting is like in the West. And he wrote this. He said, "In a western town in the days of old, before the mines closed down for lack of gold, folks there seized opportunity and they built them a right smart community. Well, they built them a school where the R's was taught, and they built them a church on the corner lot. Well, they painted her white with a steeple high to greet the town folk as they were passing by. Well, they had them a sheriff, a judge, and a mayor, but they needed a preacher to make things square, so they sent back east, as was the general rule, and hired one fresh from divinity school. Well, when Sunday came, he was all decked out to preach his sermon, whisper and shout, but when he stepped out to the podium, it was all too plain that nobody'd come, except one old cowpoke at a pew back there in his Sunday shirt and his greased down hair. He just sat there quiet, staring at the floor with an occasional glance at the church's door. Well, time stood still for the longest while. Then the preacher coughed and he faked a smile and said, "Guess we could try it again next week." But emotion reigned. He could hardly speak. His demeanor was that of a scolded pup, and he turned to leave when old Jake spoke up. He said, "Oh, hold on there, preach. 'Tain't your fault, and them there doors ain't like no vault, for there are no locks to keep folk out, and if you don't preach now, Satan's won the bout. Why, if I was to haul out a whole load of hay and only one cow showed, she'd get fed that day." Well, this preaching man the last few days had found it hard to cope with the Western ways, but seeing as how he'd found his call from this profound man with a Western drawl, why, he fixed his collar and he stood up straight and he commenced to expound on the pearly gates. Well, he shocked himself by his own recall of the book he waved, chapter, verse, and all. It was God's almighty, omnipotent power that he'd lectured on for near an hour. And the wages of sin and hell's brim fire, and he didn't weaken and he didn't tire. He was a screaming and a shouting and a pounding the floor when he noticed old Jake wasn't awake anymore. So this made him mad. So he stomped to the pew and shook old Jake's shoulder. And he said, "I'm not through. You're the one told me about the cow getting fed, and here you are acting like you're home in bed." Well, you're right there preach about what I'd said. And if I had a load of hay, that still stand true. The cow would get fed, 'tis the cowboy's code. But I wouldn't feed her the whole load. And that is church planting in the West, and I'm fearful all too accurate. And so this poem was written by anonymous, probably the greatest poem writer, I guess. I'm not sure who did it. But may I say this, that not all cowboy poetry is totally immersed in truth. So usually they make one good point and you got to weed out the rest. So this is not theologically sound, but it does make one good point. And it's called Jake the Rancher. It goes like this. Jake the Rancher went one day to fix a distant fence. The wind was cold and gusty and the clouds rolled gray and dense. As he pounded his last staples in and gathered tools to go, the temperature had fallen and the snow began to blow. When he finally reached his pickup, he felt a heavy heart. From the sound of that ignition, he knew it wouldn't start. So Jake did what you and I'd do if we'd have been there. He humbly bowed his balding head and sent aloft to prayer. As he turned the key for the last time, he softly cursed his luck. They found him 3 days later, frozen stiff in that old truck. Now, Jake had been around in life and done his share of roaming. So when he saw heaven, he was shocked. Looked just like Wyoming. I told you it wasn't theologically sound. Now, of all the saints in heaven, his favorite was St. Peter. This line ain't needed, but it helps with rhyme and meter. So they sat and talked a minute or two, or maybe it was 3. No one's keeping track. In heaven, time is free. I've always heard, Jake said to Pete, that God would answer prayers, but the one time I needed him, he just plain wasn't there. Does God answer the prayers of some and ignore the prayers of others? That don't seem exactly square. I know all men are brothers. Or does he randomly reply without good rhyme or reason? Or maybe it's the time of day or the weather or the season. Now, I ain't trying to act smart, just the way I feel. And I was wondering, could you tell me what is really the deal? Well, Peter listened very patiently. And then when Jake was done, there were smiles of recognition. He said, so you're the one. That day your truck, it wouldn't start, you sent your prayer a-flying. You gave us all a real bad time with hundreds of us trying. 1,000 angels rushed to check the status of your file. But you know, Jake, we hadn't heard from you in quite a while. And though all prayers are answered and God ain't got no quota, we didn't recognize your voice and started a truck in North Dakota. So, might be good encouragement to pray a little more often, okay? Good.